Morning. Neuroscientist Dr. Robert Melillo and Michael John Carley. He runs the New York University's Connections program for global students with autism. Gentlemen, thank you so much for being on for this important conversation today.
My pleasure.
Before we
Thank
get
you for having us, Shannon.
good to see you both. Before we get to all the headlines, the questions, there's been a lot of pushback about the press conference yesterday. Let's listen to this.
Acetaminophen, is that okay? Which is basically commonly known as Tylenol, during pregnancy can be associated with a very increased risk of autism. So taking Tylenol is not good. All right, I'll say it. It's not good. For this reason, they are strongly recommending that women limit Tylenol use during pregnancy unless medically necessary.
The press briefing, of course, went on for hours, and they pointed at one point to a variety of studies, including one Harvard researchers had conducted one study that there could, in fact, be a connection. Dr. Melillo, I just want to get your takeaway from the press briefing in general.
Yeah, I think it's good that we're talking about this. I mean, there has definitely been an increase, a dramatic increase in childhood neurological issues of all kinds. And for years, I think it's been ignored. And obviously, that is being triggered in part by environmental and lifestyle factors. I think that it's a mixed message because, we can't necessarily say that correlation is causation. And there are many other factors that may come into play. Tylenol is not the cause of autism. It may be associated in some way, but, you have to understand what's actually happening in the brain from a neuroscience perspective. And there's this kind of imbalance or asymmetry in the brain. And you have to really be able to explain that, I think. And that's really, not really explained in part just by, Tylenol use or other environmental factors like this.
I want to just get a quick follow-up with you, Doctor, before I get to John Michael on this. Is there a chance that acetaminophen could disrupt some of those neuroconnections, if you will, while a child is in the womb? Is there a chance of that?
Yes, definitely. I mean, I wrote a book on this in 2013, and there are, at that point, at least 50 environmental factors like this, many of them, like the age of the parents. Most of them affect people pre-conception rather than during pregnancy. But they're all things that also can be identified and modified. But yes, they can have more of an effect probably on the development of these connections than anything else, yes.
Michael John is an advocate for families who have family members who are on the spectrum or individuals on the spectrum. Your thoughts on the briefing yesterday?
Shannon, I thought it was more of sort of an extension of the prior history that we've had so far with RFK Jr. and maybe a little bit of an exacerbator of that history. It was just very disappointing in the context that how they can expect us to believe that after 6 months, and only 6 months, that they're going to find the cause of autism when Dr. Melillo and I were around during the days in which people spent decades trying to find the cause. And really, it was all about environmental exacerbators, perhaps, that would directly affect whether or not you had a good or a bad life as a person with autism, but that the primary cause was genetics, whether mom or dad were just carrier pigeons of the gene and maybe never showed any symptoms of the diagnosis. So we didn't really understand, what the reason for Tylenol coming up with. Obviously, they gave some explanation of that. Dr. Melillo can certainly, talk to that a lot more than I can. But prior, when we were having this expectation of what would they say after only 6 months of study, it was a little bit of a cynical exercise, I thought.
So we'll go down the rabbit hole on a couple of different story threads that we were able to pull out of the briefing. But overall, there's just no denying that alarm bells, and I know you both agree, should be ringing for all of us around the globe. Let's look at the rates, just to bring our audience into the conversation here. Autism rates soaring, according to the CDC, in 2021, in 150 children presented on the spectrum. Today, it's 1 in 31. And for boys, the stats are, much worse. These are startling numbers. Parents are apoplectic about this. You must have taken heart that you had the full weight of the government in that room, the NIH, the CDC, the FDA, CMS. Doctor, to you first.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, this is something that families like that I've been working with for years, been trying to raise alarm saying, something is happening. We need to look at this more. Again, most of the research before this has been looking for a genetic mutation. We haven't really found that. But there are genetic factors, or what we call epigenetic factors, and how they mix together. And, there are definitely associations. But again, I think the majority of our understanding should be what is actually happening in the brain of autism and how do we help that? How can we change that? Or how can we do things to prevent that from happening? And I think that's where the conversation is going.
A lot of headlines are pushing back on the briefing yesterday. RFKJ also hinted that environmental toxins could be contributing. He pledged to probe foods, pesticides, vaccines. Let's listen to that.
Some 40 to 70% of mothers who have children with autism believe that their child was injured by a vaccine. President Trump believes that we should be listening to these mothers instead of gaslighting and marginalizing them like prior administrations.
The organization Autism Speaks coming out with a statement saying they're grateful for this focus and attention from the administration, but they said they urge the administration's resources be dedicated toward advancing new and innovative areas of research rather than revisiting questions that have been well studied, including vaccines, the statement said. Is the administration right to keep digging on food, pesticides, vaccines? Michael John, let's go with you on that.
No, absolutely not. And if I may give a little bit of pushback, to me, this is not a horrible, horrible crisis. We've had three. I don't doubt the prevalence numbers making dramatic jumps whatsoever, but those dramatic jumps are actually based on more knowledge coming to fruition throughout our history. And we've had three of those jumps basically starting in 1994 when the DSM-4 came out, and suddenly people like me were qualified for an autism spectrum diagnosis. And the numbers went from 1 in 10,000 to 1 in 166. And the second big jump was in the mid-aughts when people were just starting to learn a heck of a lot more about how to spot this stuff. So that was naturally and organically going to cause more numbers. And the most recent spurt in diagnostic numbers really has to do with women and non-binary folk, because we were not taking gender expectation into account when we were looking at people for the diagnosis. You think of a small boy who doesn't make eye contact with you when he shakes your hand, and because of gender expectation, we think to ourselves, oh, something's wrong with this kid, better get him looked at. But if that girl or a non-binary person doesn't meet your eye in a handshake, she's shy. So we had a lot to go in far as this. I think the real crisis is the fact that we're not paying attention to the service needs of these families. That's the real crisis. And I'm very, very skeptical of almost any number that is coming from this administration, because we've learned that RFK Jr. really is a very dubious individual when it comes to his statistics. He has not made one credible performance in a public forum that anybody has spoken highly of. So, it's a disappointing day in my view.
Doctor, very quickly, I have to wrap, but I want to get your thoughts on, is it right to listen to these families who do have concerns about other arenas?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, again, I disagree. I think that, there's clearly been an increase in the number of people with autism, and especially on the end of the non-speaking. That's what I work with a lot. And you don't miss that. Non-speaking autism is pretty severe. And, obviously trying to give those children a voice. But the good news is that there is hope. We're able to help a lot of these kids. Even after the fact. But I think that, there are concerns from these families, and it's very, very difficult if you have a child with autism, especially non-speaking autism.
Dr. Melillo, Michael John Carley, we appreciate both of your perspectives this morning. Thanks so much for your time today.
Thank you so much for having us.